How you guys all doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Mardiege, joining you today on a Friday, January 3rd today. After we were back on here on Monday, we had a couple more days off for, the last bit of the holiday break before we are back to the regular schedule starting this upcoming Monday next week. So, with that in mind, this is the final weekend of the NFL regular season. We got a lot to talk about, including our usual weekly game picks, our final installment of the regular season version of that before we get into the playoff matchups next week. Also, talking about the playoffs, we're going to get into some playoff clinching scenarios that we do have in front of us coming up this week with the Bengals, the Steelers, the Ravens, the Vikings, and the Lions as well. We're going to get into all of that, what can happen, what can happen, who is where. All of that is coming up on today's show, as well as talking about some other things heading into Week 18. But before we dive into anything, I'd like to remind you guys, if you guys want to get involved with the show in any way possible, you guys got any questions, comments, or opinions you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to get involved. Your insight and really input into anything we say or cover on these live shows is always greatly appreciated and greatly received. It always adds a lot to these shows, so please don't think twice about saying whatever's on your mind during these live shows. And now, if you want to make it absolutely sure that I see your message and it stands out and, it ends up featuring on the show, there's an easy way to do that. Just by using the new Super Chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box that you see on your screen. And this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air. And it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. And we rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love. And again, we always appreciate it when you guys are able to get involved, but also do that for us with any question, comment, or any concern you may have. So again, let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. Again, please don't hesitate to get involved with the show. But with that in mind, before we dive into any playoff, related content on the NFL, the Pro Bowl rosters came out yesterday. The Pro Bowl for the AFC and the NFC obviously was announced yesterday, and I have pretty much the full rosters on here other than, the special teamers and the fullbacks. But it was pretty interesting, who got in, who missed out. And there was a couple spots where I thought that there are some players that should have made it. I got a couple spots that I think some players definitely were snubbed. But then I got other spots where I'm thinking maybe, it's definitely a topic of conversation. I'm not so strongly on it, but there are definitely some spots where I think that some players definitely missed out that I thought deserved to be on there. But going through some of the major, spots, so I'm not just listing off all the positions, right? At the quarterbacks, we got Sam Darnold, Jaden Daniels, and Jared Goff for the NFC. And the AFC quarterbacks, we got Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, and Josh Allen. Probably the three favorites for the MVP are all in the AFC. Three quarterbacks in the AFC. No real problems there on the AFC side of things. Then we get to the running backs. Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, and Jonathan Taylor in the AFC. And then in the NFC, we have Saquon, obviously, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Josh Jacobs. The wide receivers, there were a little bit of some head scratchers here for me. In the AFC, we had Nico Collins, Jamar Chase, obviously, with the kind of season that he had, on pace to get the Triple Crown. Zay Flowers was named to his first Pro Bowl, and Jerry Jeudy was the last one named to the AFC side of things. And then in the NFC, Justin Jefferson, of course, CeeDee Lamb, obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Terry McLaurin were all the wide receivers for the NFC. And some other mentions on here, Brock Bowers made his first Pro Bowl in his first year with the kind of season that he had. Trey McBride also made it, despite, only having one touchdown. He definitely deserved to make it. It's just kind of funny how, for how good he's done and quite literally doing almost everything for that passing game. He only has 1 touchdown, which is insane this year. And then trying to think of any other positions that were head scratchers. I mean, looking at the outside linebackers, Jared Verse in the NFC, he made his first, as a rookie, which was very impressive, coming in to the Los Angeles Rams and making an impact right away. Definitely a guy that is well deserving of that spot. And similarly, in a similar position group, we have the defensive ends, and in the NFC, no real problems with it, but I just couldn't help but think how Aiden Hutchinson would probably be in there among, those three guys. The guys that were named were Micah Parsons, Nick Bosa, and Rashawn Gary. Aiden Hutchinson, just came to my mind, and the kind of season that he was having, he surely was going to be among some of the guys named to these Pro Bowl selections, right? Talking about guys making their first Pro Bowl selections, were Jalen Carter for the Philadelphia Eagles. He made his first one, being named to the interior defensive line group, and similarly, a teammate of his, Cam Jurgens, stepped in to replace Jason Kelce, and in his first season doing so, makes a Pro Bowl, which is outstanding stuff there for the Eagles. But, for the most part, talking about offensive tackles, guards, defensive backs, really, no real problems. I thought for the most part, this list was pretty accurate. The only spots that I do have some potential issues with would be quarterback, wide receiver, and the safety spots were the three biggest ones. Defensive backs, if I have enough time to get to it, I'll touch on it, but there wasn't a huge problem there. But really, starting off with the quarterbacks, it's not like I have a huge problem with it, like I'm outraged or completely surprised by it, but, some of the bigger names that were left off were Baker Mayfield with the kind of season that he was having, and obviously Patrick Mahomes for the AFC side of things. And Mahomes, obviously, with who he is, the legacy, and, what he means already for the sport, for him to not be in there, for it not to be a given for him to be in there is surprising, but it's tough to kind of make a selection that's fair, but also, everybody knows that Patrick is obviously among the best of the best. So for him to not be in there, it is a little bit tricky because Joe Burrow's having a fantastic season. Lamar, obviously, the same thing. And Josh Allen, all three of those guys. And then you throw in Patrick in there, someone's going to not have to make it. And if you want to look at the stats and the kind of numbers that Joe and Lamar and Josh have all put up are not light years ahead of Patrick, but they're just otherworldly right now. They're doing so much for their teams that, it is a bit surprising to not see Patrick in there, but I don't really hate it. I think that it's been a pretty fair selection for the AFC. It's not like they threw in some other quarterback in there, not naming any names, but those guys are very much deserving of being in there. And then on the other side, Baker Mayfield, this one's a bit closer than I think Patrick, Joe, Lamar, and Josh Allen, just because, you look at the NFC side of things, you have Sam Darnold making it for the first time, Jaden Daniels making it in his first year, and then you have Baker Mayfield, who it's not like the numbers don't really support him either. Baker is number 2 in the entire NFL in completion percentage, completing 72% of his passes. He's tied for second in the entire NFL in touchdowns thrown with 39, only behind Joe Burrow. And he's number 3 in total yards thrown as well. And for him to not make the cut seems a little bit more unfair. But again, Sam has had an unbelievable resurgence to lead the Vikings to where they are right now. You're almost not going to leave him off, right, for where the Vikings are at this point in time. Everybody has fallen in love with Jaden Daniels, deeming him the next big thing. And, it's rightly so. It's not like he's undeserving either. He's had an amazing season. He was probably going to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. And also, you look at Jared Goff, the other quarterback, same thing similar to Sam Darnold. But Jared Goff also showed it a little bit last year. And then this year, he was on a very impressive, run there of completions and touchdowns to incompletion, something crazy. So, yeah, it was tough to include Baker in there as well. But, for the most part, it's not like I have a huge problem with it, but it is a topic of conversation certainly there with the quarterbacks. And then the one I would say I have the most problems with, I guess you could say, would be the wide receivers, mainly around these two. I mean, Jerry Judy's had a pretty decent season, considering everything for the Browns and everything like that. He's been a bright spot for them, for sure. But also, in this group for both wide receivers, and it's not just these two, but this was the main problem or the main topic I wanted to talk about, because you could include guys like A.J. Brown in here that didn't make it. Jackson Smith and Jigba also had a nice year, maybe to be thrown in there over Terry McLaurin or something like that for some people that maybe aren't too happy with that selection. I mean, in terms of numbers, just real quick, for Jackson Smith and Jigba and A.J. Brown to maybe make it over Terry McLaurin, Terry's second in touchdowns, so that's obviously a big thing. He's got 12 receiving touchdowns this year, but Jackson Smith and Jigba and A.J. Brown surpass him in receiving yards, and also Jackson Smith and Jigba has more receptions than Terry McLaurin as well. But, in terms of value, if you take Jackson Smith and Jigba away from the Seahawks, and if you take away A.J. Brown from the Eagles, huge losses. But I think if you take away Terry away from the Commanders, it's a bigger impact than taking those guys away, because you still have Devontae Smith and DK Metcalf and all those guys, and Saquon, for crying out loud. So I understand it, but those guys also were definitely deserving of being included in there as well. But going back to these two, I mean, it's tough because you look at the numbers and they're very similar. They're almost exactly the same in yards, receptions. The touchdowns obviously favor Brian Thomas a lot more. But I don't know. I feel like I can't make a legit argument for Jerry Jeudy to make it over Brian Thomas Jr. Brian Thomas Jr. has been sensational for the Jaguars, and I feel like sometimes rookies get hard done by it. A lot of rookies have had a lot of love in these selections, but for Brian Thomas not to make it, you could think that, oh, he plays for the Jaguars, they've not had a great record. Neither have the Browns. The Browns have been just as bad. So I don't know. I feel like this one was very puzzling to me, because these two are the closest ones in the AFC. I wasn't really thinking of anybody else to include in this discussion, but really Brian Thomas, to me, is arguably, other than Trevor and maybe Josh Hines Allen, probably the most valuable player to this team. I mean, Travis Etienne didn't really have a great year, and I can't think of anybody else that really brought as much value and excitement and explosiveness, that X factor ability, other than Brian Thomas Jr. And then you look at Jerry Jeudy. I mean, he did have that massive game against his former team in the Broncos, but I think of guys like Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, Nick Chubb, a little bit, and even the quarterback ahead of maybe a guy like Jerry Jeudy. Again, not that Jerry Jeudy had an awful season, but I think that this one was one I probably would have leaned more towards the rookie, maybe instead of other positions where Jared Verse made it, or these other, like Jaden Daniels or something like that. I thought Brian Thomas deservedly should have been in there, but that's a different discussion, obviously, depending on how you view each team in each situation. But I'd like Brian Thomas to have made it in that spot. And the last thing I wanted to say was the safety position. I don't know how Kirby Joseph didn't make it. The safeties that were selected in the NFC were free safety and strong safety were Buda Baker and Brian Branch, and Xavier McKinney in the NFC. I mean, if Brian Branch is playing strong safety, I get it that you have to include Kirby Joseph as the free safety, right? You're not going to make them, because that's not technically his position, if you want to go that route. But Xavier McKinney, huge addition. I loved Xavier McKinney going to the Packers, but Kirby Joseph leads. He almost has double-digit interceptions, and the kind of impact that he makes, I don't think it's a coincidence that almost every starter on the Lions defense got hurt except him, and they're still, keeping their head above water, right? Not to diminish anything Aiden Hutchinson, Malcolm Rodriguez, Barnes, or Alexander Zaloni do for that team, but you look at some of the moments and plays that he's made last week against the 49ers. The 49ers probably would have kept scoring if it wasn't for that interception. Again, the game against the Green Bay Packers, pick six completely changes the dynamic of that game when Brian Branch left in that game. So I thought that one was just a crazy one for Kirby Joseph not to make it. The kind of impact that he has, in terms of turnovers and things like that, was a bit head-scratching for me. But again, for the most part, I thought it was all right, but I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of those changes that I kind of laid out there in this first segment. But we'll see if anything changes with availability and things like that closer to the Pro Bowl. But I did mention Kirby Joseph, and we're going to go and talk about the Detroit Lions a little bit more in the next segment. I'm super excited for this upcoming game against the Lions and the Minnesota Vikings. So we're going to preview that game, talk about it. Could arguably be the best game in terms of stakes, talent, everything this game has included in recent memory. So we're going to talk about it, break it down when we return.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
All right, guys, we are back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to look ahead all the way to Sunday Night Football, because I can't remember an NFL season finale that I've been more excited about than this upcoming Sunday Night Football game that we have to end the entire regular season, because there's no Monday Night Football or Thursday Night Football, obviously, this week. So the very last game that we're going to have for the 2024-25 season is going to be this one. And I don't think there's a better game with higher stakes, more on the line than this one, obviously, right? The playoff picture will be complete after the Minnesota Vikings travel to Detroit to settle who will win the NFC North, who will be the NFC's number one seed, and who will earn that one bye week ahead of the postseason starting next weekend. And arguably, the two best teams in the NFC, you want to throw Philadelphia in there, maybe ahead of Minnesota, ahead of Detroit, or maybe just below them. But these two have definitely been some of the most consistent teams in the entire NFL this season. And both Minnesota and Detroit enter this game with a 14-2 record, as last week Detroit kind of played it close against the 49ers, like we kind of mentioned in the first segment. And they rallied after, being down in that game to defeat the 49ers in San Francisco with another great offensive performance by, Jared Goff. Jahmyr Gibbs had a great day. And it feels like that's kind of like the way that they're going to have to do it, right? With all the injuries that they're dealing with. They just keep rolling through these teams. So they're more than capable of doing it, but doing it, into the postseason, it could be a little bit more troubling, depending on if you get the number one seed as well. So that is something that they're going to have to manage, obviously, and having the number one seed would definitely be a lot easier, right, to do it in Detroit rather than being on the road each and every time. But on the side of the Minnesota Vikings, they prevented Green Bay from coming back in their game, right? They had the big lead in that game, and they almost squandered it. But they ended up winning by 2 points, sweeping the Packers, and, getting to 14-2 on the season. So now, going into this matchup on Sunday Night Football, the Vikings enter with a 9-game winning streak. The last time they lost was back on October 24th against the Los Angeles Rams on the road, while Detroit enters this game with a 2-game win streak after their 11-game win streak was snapped a few weeks ago by the Buffalo Bills. So, just to kind of put it in perspective, what kind of game we're talking about here and where it stands, like historically, and, just to give you guys an idea of how good these teams are and the kind of seasons that they've had also. It's not, just something you always see, obviously, two teams in the same division, mind you, being so consistent and having the exact same record. And for it all to kind of line up for the last game of the season is pretty remarkable. So, one of the things that kind of stands out here is that this game has the most combined wins for any regular season game in NFL history. In this game, the winner becomes only the 9th team to end a season with 15 or more wins in an entire regular season, while the loser will have the most wins for any wildcard team ever in NFL history. The last time two teams met with the number 1 seed on the line for the last game was in 1993 when the Cowboys and the Giants played, however long ago that was, 31 years ago or something like that. It's not something that just always happens, right? Usually, like in the AFC, maybe not to the degree of the Chiefs, right, obviously, but usually you get an idea of who the number 1 seed is going to be. Maybe it's a little bit close, but it never lines up to be the last game of the season. Obviously, it was flexed into Sunday Night Football, but for it to all line up like this, two teams in the same division to be two of the best in the NFL is the kind of stuff that, you only dream you could ever see happen, right? But it's going to happen this Sunday, obviously. And the last thing here, this is only the 4th game ever between two teams that are 10 games above 500. The last time two teams faced off that were 10 games above 500 was in 2005 when the Seahawks took on the Indianapolis Colts. So, again, these two teams, they've been playing some of the best football in the NFL. Obviously, Detroit doing it right from the get-go. When they were fully healthy, they were just steamrolling teams. And then as we get going through the regular season, a lot of guys began to fall. And you did begin to get a little bit worried about it, especially when Aiden Hutchinson went down and Barnes and Alexander Zaloni and Carlton Davis and guys like that, right? But, it's a huge merit to them for still being able to be 14-2 and being capable of, managing and maneuvering through all those injuries, right? David Montgomery is another one that got hurt as well, and they've just continued to chug along throughout the season, playing against the Bills and the Packers and the Bears, giving them a little bit of trouble as well. It's been a huge accomplishment. So for the Lions to be in this position, right, almost defying all the odds with the injuries and everything like that, to have a season like this at 14-2, and then somehow in one of the outcomes to not be the number 1 seed seems so insane, because since probably week 7, I thought the Lions were going to be the number 1 seed, and I guess that's just a bit of the, I think, national narrative around the Vikings that nobody really wanted to give them any credit because their quarterback was Sam Darnold. But as much as the Lions should get credit for, maneuvering through all the injuries, a huge, bouquet of flowers to Sam Darnold for being in a spot that nobody ever would have predicted he'd be in. From the Jets, seeing ghosts against the New England Patriots, being shipped out to Carolina, starting the season 4-0 and then having it all crumble down, then being a backup in San Francisco, signing a 1-year deal with the Vikings, knowing that J.J. McCarthy was probably going to be the future quarterback, and then to just forget about all of that and be the starter and have the kind of season that he's having, making a Pro Bowl, is, again, another insane thing to happen. It just adds to the whole, mystique of this game. There's so many storylines and so many things to kind of follow up on. It just gets you amped up for it, quite honestly. So, that's a couple things to look out for in the game if you weren't really aware of them going into the game. They already played already, which is the crazy part too. They already played back in week 7, and that time Detroit won that game 31-29 in Minnesota after they were winning 28-17, and they gave up that lead, and they were actually losing, 28-29 at one point until, they got it all together at the end and they kicked a game-winning field goal. But, that was one of the 2 losses that Minnesota has all year. They could be even better than they are now if they would have won that game. But, it is what it is. That game was one of the best ones of the entire season. So to kind of follow up on that with even bigger stakes, even higher stakes, is super, super exciting as well. But getting into the game now a little bit, talking about some of the injuries and, updates on that side of things. For the Lions, first off, their wide receiver Khalif Raymond, who hasn't played since November 24th, was a full participant in practice this week. He's expected to come off of the IR and make his return for the first time in over a month. Also, someone that could be making their return is Lions linebacker Alex Anzalone, who hasn't played since even, longer than Khalif Raymond. He hasn't played since November 17th because of a fractured forearm, I'm pretty sure. He was a limited participant this week, and he could return in this game. It's not as guaranteed as maybe Khalif Raymond being a full participant, but there is optimism that they could have Alex Anzalone back. And to have any one of those starters on defense come back is going to be huge. But of course, you also don't want to rush him back, right? Because if you do play on the road all those games, you're going to want him at his full strength. So we'll see where he stands. I also heard something that David Montgomery could play, but looking at it now, he's labeled as being out, so I don't expect him to play. And everybody else should be good. I don't think there's any big injury news for the Vikings. Everybody, from their standpoint, is pretty healthy, so they should be at their full strength. But before I get into the matchups, there's one thing I want to see from both of these teams, right? What I'm looking to identify in this game to kind of give me more confidence in them going into the playoffs. For the side of the Minnesota Vikings, I just want to see them close out games. I want to see them close out games, make the plays that they have to make sure they get the win. Because last week, they gave up that lead. They were fortunate not to lose to the Packers, right? But the last game against the Lions specifically, Sam Darnold had, a drive there towards the end of the game where they ended up punting, and the Lions, got the ball back and ended up kicking a game-winning field goal. But during that drive, Sam Darnold missed a couple throws, just didn't connect in some of the, gotta-have-it plays down the stretch there. So if they're able to play a complete game, especially with the way this Lions defense has been trending, I want to see them, close the door on this game. Don't leave it open. Don't leave it to chance. Really be convincing about this win and showing everybody why you deserve to be the number 1 seed, right? And then for the Lions, kind of like I mentioned about the defense, I need to see something. I need to see something from them because I think the last 3 games, they're averaging about 7.5 yards given up per play. And I saw this morning how the 2 worst teams in that category are giving up about 5.5 yards per play, and the Lions are well above that. So I need them to see something, not just Kirby Joseph intercepting the ball late in the game, right? I need them to get off the field on 3rd down. Everything, especially against the 49ers, looked wide open. Like George Kittle had a bunch of yards wide open. Ricky Pearsall looked like an all-pro in his first year, right? He's still a rookie. He looked like an all-pro receiver, and if it wasn't for that interception, I don't think the 49ers would have ever stopped scoring. So this defense, I need to see something from them. They need to show a little bit of resistance because I have more confidence in the Vikings to do that over the Lions defense. So that's something I want to see. And that goes into the matchups here quickly because one of the matchups I want to see is the Vikings, all of their offensive weapons going up against a Lions secondary with no Carlton Davis this time. Sam Darnold just threw for 377 yards last week against the Packers, and so did Brock Purdy against this defense. So you're not going to have a starter out there in Carlton Davis. You're going to have a rookie out there in Terrion Arnold trying to cover Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, Jalen Naylor, all these guys. That's going to be a huge matchup. If they're able to stop the passing game and not let Sam Darnold throw it all over the field on them, is going to be huge, right? And then another matchup where we got a matchup that we didn't see in the first game is Jahmyr Gibbs being the premier back now, not having David Montgomery in to kind of spot him, going up against Blake Cashman. Blake Cashman is a linebacker for the Vikings that didn't play in their first game, and he is, a green dot guy, the guy that kind of lines up everything, and he makes up that linebacking core with Ivan Pace Jr., himself, Alex Van Ginkel, to form like a front seven with Phillips and Grenard and Dallas Turner, right? He's a huge part of that. With Brian Flores, he's a huge part of what Brian Flores wants to do with their defense. So Jahmyr Gibbs, I would say, won the matchup last week against Fred, going up linebacker to running back, and it's going to be another big one in this game as well. And then the last one I want to see is Jameson Williams going up against Stephon Gilmore or Byron Murphy Jr. Because Jameson Williams has been playing pretty well the last couple games. He has 4 touchdowns, 257 yards, and 13 receptions. So obviously Amon-Ra St. Brown gets a lot of the attention, but can he continue that, production? Because last time I think he might not have even had a reception, I don't believe. So if he's able to contribute something, is obviously going to be huge against a passing defense for the Vikings that's a little spotty. So those are all the matchups. And in terms of who I think is going to win, I probably am going to go with the Vikings, because the Lions defense, I think, just really worries me a lot. I did not like what I saw last week against the 49ers. Debo wasn't playing great, and he looked like the old Debo, right? George Kittle has had a great year, but even for his standards, he was getting like wide open. Same thing with Ricky Pearsall. I talked about it before. And, they were just not showing any sort of resistance at all, not really getting to Brock either. So, and the offensive line was banged up too. The Vikings' offensive line is going to be in a lot better shape, you would imagine, going into this game with all of their starters pretty much playing except Christian Darrisaw. So, what I saw from the Vikings last week compared to what I saw from this Lions defense really worries me. And I don't think they really matched up that well against them, right? They're going to need to get pressure on Sam while also, giving up some of that cover to Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Jalen Naylor, and those guys. So I think it's just going to be a bit too overwhelming, and I'm going to go with the Vikings, to come out of nowhere, and Sam Darnold to lead this Vikings team to a first-round bye week in 2024. Who would have thought? But that is what I think is going to happen in that game. And speaking of what I think is going to happen in games, we're going to get to our final game picks of the regular season, right? We're going to go to part 1 in the next segment, and then after that, finish it off with part 2. So we'll be right back with the final game picks of the regular season.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to get into the final game picks of the 2024-25 regular season. Gone through it each and every week, and now we've finally gotten to the end of it. So I didn't get to all the games. There were a couple games, like the Saturday games that I didn't get to just because I wanted to focus on Sunday and, some of with everybody pretty much playing, kind of keeping it to the limits, time-wise and everything like that. So we didn't include tomorrow's picks, but these are all the predictions that I have for the Sunday games. And I have it up here for you guys. Here you go. This is part one, and then obviously we're going to get to part two after this segment. But starting with the Sunday slate, the Chicago Bears at the Green Bay Packers. The Packers are trying to avoid being the number 7 seed and playing in Philadelphia, basically, right? For a game that you might think, like the Bears and Packers, what does it matter if the Vikings and the Lions are going to win the division? It matters because you're the Packers and you don't want to go to Philly with all their starters being on rest and playing on the road in Philadelphia especially. So that is something that the Packers are going to try to avoid. A win would lock them into the number 6 seed if also Washington were to lose as well. So they do need a little bit of help, but they are obviously favored in this matchup. And, going up against a Chicago team that has really just stuttered to the finish here because their offense only put up 3 points at home last week, and their defense played pretty well. They only held Seattle to 6 points, but even still, they somehow lost that game. And even though the game was close between them the first time around, this time it's going to be in Green Bay. I expect the Packers to come out with a little bit more efficiency and a little bit more determination because Jordan Love and even Josh Jacobs as well didn't play great in their game last week against the Vikings. So I'm going to go with the Packers. They need to win. And, Chicago, they're just really wanting to get to the end of this season. So the Packers are going to handle business, at least on their side, and get the win here over their division rivals. Then we move down to some more playoff implications, looking at the Falcons trying to make the playoffs for the first time since 2017. The loss last week to the Commanders means that the Falcons need the Saints to beat the Buccaneers in Tampa, and the Falcons obviously need to win for them to win the division and get into the playoffs. They no longer can get into the playoffs as a wild card team, so they either win the division or they're eliminated. So it's unfortunate because their future was in their hands. If they would have beat the Commanders and if they would have, beaten the Panthers, right, they would have won the division and they'd be in, regardless of the Bucs and Saints game, right? But now, because they lost that one in overtime, they need a little bit of help here. And, they are playing the Panthers, who are in a tough spot now because the Panthers have kind of lost a little bit of that steam that we saw from them going up against the Buccaneers the first time around, the Eagles as well. A couple games where you thought, hey, this, even the Kansas City Chiefs too, where you were looking at this Panthers team is this the same Panthers team? Why are they being competitive? But, that's kind of died down a little bit. They kind of got their butts kicked last week against the Buccaneers. So I am favoring the Falcons in this one. They're benefiting a lot from Michael Penix Jr. He really had a great game last week. He put them in spots to win, but unfortunately, they, the coin toss didn't go their way. So they ended up losing that game last week. But in terms of this matchup, I think it favors them. Obviously, it should be a bit easier for Michael Penix Jr. than the Commanders' defense was. So in this game, looking at the Falcons and their offense, who have put up 24 or more points in Michael Penix's 2 starts, compared to Carolina allowing 30-plus points in their last 3 games, I'm going to go with the Falcons. They need to win, and they're at home. They're favored. They're playing a lot better. So, Fat Albert, what's going on? Welcome to the show. But yeah, I'm going to go with the Falcons, if you didn't hear me say that before. Then moving on to our next game here on the left side, looking at the Saints and the Buccaneers, another game in the NFC South. Simply for the Buccaneers, they just need to win. And they're probably going to win. They're going to win this game, I believe, because the Saints have only scored 10 points in their last 2 games. That includes a 34-0 loss to the Green Bay Packers on the road as well. They're dealing with a bunch of injuries, and the Buccaneers just finished scoring 48 points last week, and they scored, I believe, over 50 points against the Saints in their first time around. They've also scored 24 or more points in their last 5 games. And, I mean, Bucky Irving has been not a revelation, because I don't think it's been like a huge, turnaround, but it's been a pleasant surprise to have Bucky Irving play and get better each and every week, which is the most important thing. He's playing great. His fellow rookie, Jalen McMillan, is also playing pretty well. Mike Evans, since coming back, is playing exceptional. He's probably going to get to 1,000 yards again for his streak to continue. And Baker Mayfield, right, having a Pro Bowl caliber season, even though he didn't make it, playing out of his mind as well. So the Buccaneers are going to win this game, and the Saints almost don't stand any sort of chance. I can't think of any way the Saints could win. So the Buccaneers are going to win this game. Then, moving over to the other side, a weird one, because the Bills are playing the Patriots, and not only weird because the game was a lot closer the first time around in Buffalo. This time it's going to be in New England, but Josh Allen is going to play right in this game, because head coach Sean McDermott announced that Josh Allen will technically start this game because they want to keep his active consecutive starting streak alive, right? Josh Allen talked about it, and he said that it meant a lot to him. Even though the Bills have nothing to play for, they're going to be the number 2 seed guaranteed, so they really could rest their starters, and they're going to rest most of them, but Josh Allen is technically going to start this game, and I'd only imagine him to be out there, hand it off maybe 3 times, and then, sit down the rest of the game. But I thought that was pretty interesting for him to kind of keep his streak alive. And, the game was close. The game was close a couple weeks ago, so that was also something to kind of make note of as well. But it fluctuates, right? Because the Patriots play the Bills close, and then they go over to New England, and they get smacked by the Chargers 40-7 in their own home. So it's been a very up and down season for the Patriots, obviously. Drake May was banged up last week against the Chargers, but he should be healthy enough to play in this game. And it's mostly going to be backups for Buffalo because they are locked into that number 2 seed. But with that in mind, you'd think the Patriots would win. I don't even think the Patriots should win, because they're the number 1 pick right now, and that's a great spot to be in with Drake May, and knowing that he's probably going to be your future. For you to have the number 1 pick right now, right, like the Patriots, you'd want them to lose, right, if you're a fan, right? If you have the number 1 pick, even if you don't want like Travis Hunter or something like that, which no one has ever said, you could trade that pick, right, and get even more stuff for it. And this offseason is going to be huge for them. So it's not a spot where, they're going out there thinking, oh, we're going to end it on a win, right? If they win, they could drop to like 4 or 5 or something like that. So I'm going to go with the Bills to win this game. I think Tyrod's going to go in there, play pretty well, and do enough to beat the Patriots on the road. Then a game with really no implications in the AFC South. The Jaguars traveling to Indianapolis. The Colts are dealing with a lot of frustrations internally with not only Anthony Richardson, the standard, pretty much the standards that are in that organization have been called into question by their players, like Pat McAfee as well. It's not going great. It's not been a great season really for the Indianapolis Colts, obviously. But, for how bad it's been over there, for the Jaguars, not that much better, but, Brian Thomas Jr., right? At least they have that going for them. He's been playing phenomenally all of the regular season, so that's great to see. I mentioned Anthony Richardson before. He's dealing with a back injury, and he could play this week. He said he's felt a little bit better, but, I don't know. He mentioned something like it was potentially a chronic problem with his back, which doesn't fill me with any more confidence than it did before. So maybe I wouldn't even have him play if, depending on what he said, obviously. It makes me nervous just thinking about that. So, that's where things stand with him. I mean, the last time these two teams met, it was a 71-point contest between the both of them. But Indianapolis has given up 30-plus points the last 3 weeks, so it's kind of inching towards another one of those high-scoring games. And, last week it was an ugly loss to the Giants, which just kind of epitomizes this season for the Colts. So I feel like they're going to bounce back in this game. They have too many weapons to not bounce back, right? Brian Thomas is great, but, they got Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, Josh Downs, all are capable players. So I think the Colts are just going to basically just out-talent the Jaguars in this game. They should have enough to win. And then the last game, this game could have been a lot more exciting if, the Cowboys had a different season. But, the first game was insane, if you guys remember that one, with the back and forth. And the last couple minutes of that game were, ridiculous. It made no sense in that game. The Commanders are still trying to play for something in this week, while the Cowboys, have everybody injured. And, again, they're just trying to have this season end. There's no CD, no Dak, obviously. Everybody's pretty much injured. And, last week they just got smacked around by Kenny Pickett and the Eagles' third-string quarterback as well. I know Philly's a wagon, but it's just been a long end of season for the Dallas Cowboys. And, the other side of things, the Commanders and Jaden Daniels are playing great. Jaden Daniels has beaten the Eagles and the Falcons to clinch a playoff spot, and he's also thrown 8 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, thrown for 485 passing yards, and ran for over 200 yards in the last 2 games. So I think Jaden Daniels alone gives me enough confidence for the Commanders to go out there and win the game against the Cowboys and kind of get a little bit of revenge there from the first time around. So those are all my picks for the first half. I'm going to go to a quick break right now and come back with the second half of the Week 18 game picks and predictions.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back here to the Chip Shot Football Podcast. Jumping straight back into the game picks and predictions that we had going in the last segment. We talked about part 1. Now we got part 2 in this segment, right? Looking at what we have coming up for that. The second half of the Sunday slate is, it's pretty jam-packed this week. There's a lot of games, obviously, with no one having any buys and everything like that. Quite literally everyone's playing. I couldn't even fit everybody playing on Sunday into this game. Like the Houston Texans aren't on here because they're already locked in, and the Titans really don't have much to play for at all. So, the Texans were probably going to win that game anyway, but they're one of the teams that I just couldn't include on here for a couple reasons. But looking at the teams that I do have on here and some of the matchups, starting off with the NFC East in the top left-hand corner. Speaking of no implications, right? The Eagles are locked in. They have all their starters, not playing. I don't like Saquon not playing. I think that's really, really dumb. I know Saquon has said that he, is for the team first. If they don't want me to play, that's fine. I want bigger things in this season, right? And they just wanted, to win the Super Bowl, obviously, right? That's the biggest thing. So they're going to rest their starters, despite the fact that Saquon and this team could go into the history books. And for anybody trying to diminish that, like the Eagles are playing for Super Bowls, right? Personal records don't matter. Like, can we be honest? And like, that's a historical, once in a generation type of thing that it's not like Saquon could just think that, oh, maybe next year I could just get it. I felt like that was important. It had a lot of significance in my mind, at least. So they better go win the Super Bowl now if they're not going to have Saquon go out there and, cement his name as one of the best running backs ever. With a record like that, it meant more to me, I thought. And I thought it could be something that brought this team together even more. But of course, you have the injuries and everything like that that could happen. I acknowledge that, but I don't know. I felt like this was big enough for them to play him, but I mean, we'll see. If they go out and win a Super Bowl, then it'd be worth it. But I don't know. It didn't sit well with me. But at the end of the day, I feel like they're going to win this game. The Giants should lose this game, realistically, if they want a better draft pick. But you never know. They could end up winning this game for whatever reason. They haven't won in Philadelphia since 2013, and this is definitely not the time to do it. So I'm going to go with the Eagles for the Giants' sake to win this game. Then going down, moving to the next game that we have on here, this one could have been just as important as the Vikings and the Lions game a little bit, because this could have been for the division and everything like that. But based on the results last weekend, the Rams already won the division, and I saw today that there's not going to be Puka Nacua, Matthew Stafford, Kyron Williams, Cooper Kupp. All those guys are not going to play amongst some other starters. So, they're really focusing on the fact that they just made it into the playoffs. They don't really care who they play, because if they would have won this game, they could have potentially avoided the Vikings or the Lions if they would have won. But, it's not like they're going to lose automatically, right? They're going to have Jimmy Garoppolo playing, and I don't know how many Seahawks are going to play either, but, it feels like the Rams are just content with playing anybody. They don't really care about trying to avoid anybody. They're in, so they're going to prioritize the health and rest over, a better matchup on paper, so to say. So with that in mind, I had the Rams winning this game because I was very impressed with their defense and how they've allowed only 6 points, 9 points, and 9 points again over the last 3 weeks. But now with all the players being ruled out, I'm going to go with Seattle to win this game. I feel like they're going to have most of their guys playing, so I'm going to go with Seattle to win this game in the last game of the regular season. Unfortunately, they're not going to be able to make the playoffs, but they're set up pretty nicely there in Seattle with their new head coach, Mike Macdonald. He's done a great job, so they're going to win this game to kind of end it on a positive note. Then moving down to the next game that we have here, the Miami Dolphins are playing in New York. The rematch of this game from from a couple weeks ago. The Dolphins are still alive, and they need a win plus a little bit more help to make it into the playoffs. But they're going to have to do it without their starting quarterback again. Tua Tagovailoa is not going to play in this game. With the Dolphins season on the line, it's going to be up to their backup, Tyler Huntley, to go out there and win this game against the New York Jets. And I mean, Tyler Huntley got the win last week, and it was against Cleveland, who put up a little bit of a fight, but their offense was so bad last week. It was atrocious watching them. I thought, shame on me for thinking that the Browns could come back at any point in that game, because every time they had the opportunity, it was not working out. So, it was against a poor Cleveland team, and now they're playing a pretty poor Jets team, right? If you saw the game against Buffalo last week, it doesn't fill you with any confidence, if you're a Jets fan, right? But, this season's already been lost for them anyway, so it doesn't really matter, I guess, for a lot of fans if they win or lose. But they were really humiliated last week against the Bills, and even with Tyler Huntley, Miami is rolling a little bit here. They're playing pretty good defense, and they're running it a lot better with Devon Achane. He hasn't really been talked about enough, I thought, this season overall. And I'm expecting Tua to come back eventually. I thought he would be all right to play in this game, but I feel like from what I saw from the Jets last week, it just feels like they're easily breakable, right? They're easy to kind of get down in the dumps. Once one or two things don't go their way, I feel like they're already defeated, right? You don't got to do too much to kind of get them to believe that they're going to lose again, right? So the Dolphins are still playing for something. They're going to go out there with a purpose. So because of that, I'm going to go with the Dolphins to win this game, despite not having Tua Tagovailoa. And speaking about not having your starting quarterback, the Kansas City Chiefs are not going to have Patrick Mahomes play against the Denver Broncos. It's going to be in Denver this time around. The first time, if you guys remember, the Broncos almost won that game, but the Chiefs blocked their game-winning field goal, of course, right? And they won that game to continue their win streak. But now that they've secured the number one seed, the bye week and everything like that, no Patrick, no most of the starters for the Kansas City Chiefs. But the Broncos have lost their last two games, and even still, they hold their future in their hands, basically. They just need to win, and they'll get the last spot in the playoffs, despite if the Bengals lose, if the Dolphins win, anything like that. The Broncos just need to win, and everything else doesn't matter. So it's pretty favorable, right, being at home. Despite the losses, they've played very well against the Bengals, and even against the Chargers, they had opportunities in that game. So it would just be so brutal if they miss the playoffs, going on a 3-game losing streak to end the year and completely miss out. That would be really harsh, because I think out of all the teams to make it, out of the Bengals, the Broncos, and the Dolphins, I think the Broncos have earned it more, deserve it more than any of those other teams. So because there's going to be no Patrick and how close they played him the first time around, I'm going to go with Denver to win this game and punch their ticket to the playoffs. And then the second to last game we have on here, the Chargers playing in Las Vegas. Not too much to play for here. I mean, the Chargers, if they win and the Steelers lose, could move up to the number 5 seed and avoid playing Baltimore, most likely. So that could be something. And, it is something to play for. But, I didn't think the Rams were going to rest any of their starters. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Chargers do so either, right? They're in the playoffs. They probably believe they can beat anybody. So I wouldn't be surprised if they prioritize rest over, getting a slightly better seed, but it wouldn't surprise me either way. But but because of that, I'm going to go with the Chargers to just win this game. It is interesting in this game, though, because you got two of the most outstanding rookies in the class, with Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, former teammates in Georgia, gonna dominate this division for the years to come. It's pretty interesting to see them, playing against each other now, probably for the foreseeable future. So they're going to be the two feature guys. They're both having outstanding seasons, but, one team is obviously a lot better than the other. So I'm going to go with the Chargers to win this game in the end, to end the regular season on a good note. And lastly here, it's kind of funny how the 49ers and the Cardinals kind of resemble each other a little bit. It just feels like there were moments in this season where the 49ers, you felt like, all right, they could be turning things around now. They're going to get McCaffrey back. They're going to get everybody back, and they're going to go on this run, right? It never really happened. And then at one point for the Cardinals, you thought, like, they're in first place, right? Like, Marvin Harrison's playing pretty well. Kyler's playing very well as well, from weeks like 4 to 8 or something like that. The Cardinals were in first place, and you're thinking, like, hey, like, maybe, like, everybody else isn't playing fantastic. Why can't it be the Cardinals, right? But then they kind of fell off. The 49ers really couldn't get over those injuries, and where they had moments where you kind of felt that they could continue this groove, it kind of just fell short. So it is kind of funny how they mirror each other in that way. And, the kind of difference I see right now, though, is the fact that the 49ers just fill me with a bit more confidence than the Cardinals. I think the 49ers are in a bit more of an optimistic stage right now with the kind of guys like Ricky Pearsall, the kind of game that he had last week, Isaac Guerrero, Renardo Green, Dominic Pooney, all these guys that they got the chance to see this year and know what kind of players that they have in those guys. I think that's been a benefit of this season if you're going to take away anything. And I just feel like despite them losing, the last couple games, I feel like they're in a lot better spot because the Cardinals have had some pretty brutal games to kind of knock them out of the playoffs these last couple weeks. So because of that, I'm going to go with the 49ers to win this game. Get a little bit of revenge here because the Cardinals did beat them in San Francisco the first time around. So the way the 49ers are playing right now gives me a bit more confidence for them to go out there and win this time around. And that concludes all the games that we've seen each and every weekend on Sundays for the NFL. We'll see how accurate I am when we return on Monday back to the regular schedule. But for right now, we do have one more segment to get to, and that's just kind of like a quick recap, quick run through of the playoff scenarios, and I'll give my final predictions as to what I believe the playoff picture is going to look like after we get through all the games on Sunday. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with that segment. Thank you guys for joining me here for the last segment of today's show. We're just going to go through a quick run through of the playoff scenarios, the seedings, who could end up where, and I'm going to give my final predictions as well towards the end of this segment as to what I believe the seeding 1 through 7 is going to be in each conference. So, starting off with what we know so far about the seedings and everything like that, what is guaranteed to this point before we head into the weekend is the fact that in the NFC, the only team that's guaranteed right now is the Philadelphia Eagles, where they are right now in the standings. The Eagles are the number 2 seed right now. They're not moving from it. A win or a loss, other results, it doesn't matter. The Eagles are going to be the number 2 seed. They won the division last week, so they're going to rest their starters this week, knowing that they're not going to move from that spot. So that's pretty much the only spot that's guaranteed in the NFC is the Philadelphia Eagles. And then on the other side, in the AFC, the Chiefs, they know they're going to be the number 1 seed. They got 2 weeks rest now for their starters. They're not going to play this week, and they got a bye week next week. So as usual, the Chiefs are going to be very well rested for their start to the playoffs come the divisional round. Then, much like the Eagles, the number 2 seed in the AFC is also locked up by the Buffalo Bills. They play, they will play the Dolphins, the Broncos, or the Bengals in the wild card round, depending on who gets that final spot. If you're the Bills, you probably want to play the Dolphins in an ideal world, considering how both of the games have gone and how the Dolphins play in cold weather. So, if I'm a Bills fan, that's probably who I want to play. I don't want to play the Bengals if I'm a Bills fan. That's the last team I want to play. But we'll see. They're locked in. They're going to get a good amount of rest before they begin the wild card next week. And then the other spot that's guaranteed is the number 4 spot in the AFC. Obviously, with Houston locking up that spot because they already won their division. And because of their record, they're not able to move up to the number 3 spot over Baltimore or Pittsburgh, and they're obviously not going to drop because they won the division. So they're locked into number 4, and they're not going to move. They're going to play the they're going to play the 5 seed, but it's just depending on who's going to be there. That is going to be their matchup. And that's where we're going to start with the games on tomorrow in the AFC North. The scenarios that we have going on tomorrow is simply for the Baltimore Ravens. If they win the division and they get the number 3 seed. Just if they beat the Browns, the god-awful Browns, if they can beat them, they're going to be division champions for the second year in a row now, second consecutive year for them, and nothing else really matters. All they got to do is just beat the Browns, and they'd be the 3 seed and play either the Steelers or the Chargers, right? But then, similarly to that, connected to that is if for whatever reason they lose in an alternate universe for whatever reason, and the Steelers beat the Bengals tomorrow, then the Steelers will get the number 3 seed. They would host a playoff game, and they would play either the Chargers or the Ravens as well, but at home, obviously, right? Slim chance that happens because the Steelers first have to beat the Bengals, and before that, they're going to know if they won the division because the Steelers taking on the Bengals. The Steelers will know if they have a chance to win the division or if they're just playing for the 5 or the 6 seed, essentially. But, you might be thinking, all right, well, if they know they're not going to win the division, why does it matter? It matters because if the Steelers lose and then you go over to Sunday and the Chargers win, the Steelers would drop to the 6th seed and the Chargers would be the 5th seed in that regard because they have the same record. So the Steelers would drop to 10-7 with a loss, and the Chargers would be 11-6. And that matters because, in all honesty, out of all the division, winners, the Texans are looking like the most vulnerable one. So if you're the Chargers or the Steelers, you want to play in Houston in a dome in nice conditions over going to Baltimore or, playing outside essentially in the cold against Derrick Henry, Lamar, and trying to tackle them in the cold in that environment. No thanks. So that's what the situation is kind of looking like for the 3, the 5, and the 6 seed right now. Essentially, it's going to be the Ravens, the Steelers, the Chargers, or the Texans playing amongst each other in whatever order they end up, finalizing in with the results tomorrow and on Sunday. So that's what's initially going to happen with the start of the weekend. And then, not too far off of that, we get to the 7th spot in the AFC, the last spot that's not guaranteed by any team currently right now. It all comes down to the Dolphins, the Broncos, and the Cincinnati Bengals. Starting with the Bengals because they play tomorrow, all they simply need to do for their part of things is just win. If they win, they got a chance. They don't really have any say in it, but if they lose, nothing else really matters, right? If they lose, they're eliminated. So they need to win tomorrow in Pittsburgh to just get the opportunity to hopefully have things fall in their way. And if they do, they'll be the number 7 seed in the AFC playoffs. What do they need to happen? Well, they need to win, like I said, and also they would need to have Denver and Miami to lose on Sunday for them to be the number 7 seed. So they need a good amount of help for them to make it. Out of all 3 of those teams, I think I saw that the Bengals have the least chance to make it out of all of them because they need both of them to win, as opposed to the Dolphins that only would need to win, but they'd only need the Broncos to lose in that scenario, right? They only need one of those teams to lose and win compared to the Bengals needing both of them to lose, right? But of course, like I mentioned before in the previous segment, none of that matters. A Bengals win, a Dolphins win doesn't matter if the Broncos win against the Kansas City Chiefs because they do have the number 7 spot right now. If they win, they're going to get the last spot. But there is the off chance that they throw away this opportunity and they lose. And if they lose, right, and the Dolphins win and the Bengals win, then the Dolphins would get that final spot. If they lose and the Dolphins lose, it goes to the Bengals, right? But there is a weird scenario where the Broncos lose and the Dolphins lose and the Bengals lose, then the Broncos would still make it, right? Because all of them lost, so nothing really changed. So a lot of things that could go in each and every way. based on the matchup, the Chiefs are tricky, but I would feel like it would have to be the Broncos in this scenario to get the last spot, in my opinion. But we'll see when everything kicks off tomorrow. Then we're going to move over to the NFC here real quick. Looking at the number 1 seed, essentially, it all comes down to the game between the Vikings and the Lions. The winner gets the number 1 seed, the bye week, and the division, while the loser is locked into the 5th seed. Simple as that. They don't really care about any other results. It's just a win or a loss determines if you're the 1 or if you're the number 5 seed as well. Then we get to the 3 and 4 spot because the Eagles are locked into number 2. We get to the Rams and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Rams, all they need to do, because they're the number 3 seed right now, all they need to do is win. If they win, they lock up the number 3 seed, and they'll play either the... Who they'll play? They'll play either the Commanders or the Green Bay Packers, right? But if they lose, they have a chance to still make it, but only to still be the number 3 seed, but only if the Buccaneers also lose to the New Orleans Saints. If the Packers lose and also the Buccaneers lose, if the Rams lose and the Buccaneers lose, the Rams would still stay at number 3. But in that scenario, if the Buccaneers were to lose, they would completely be out of the playoffs if the Falcons were to win. If that were to happen, the Falcons would go all the way up to number 4, and the Bucs would be eliminated from the playoffs if they were to lose. But the Buccaneers hold their future in their hands because they play a very weak Saints team, and all they need to do is win. And by winning, they win the division, and they lock up the one of the top seeds, right? Also, though, if the Rams lose and the Buccaneers do win, because the Rams, like we mentioned before, are not playing a good amount of their starters, if that were to happen, then the Buccaneers would move to number 3 and avoid the Lions or the Vikings. If they were to win, which I have them to win, and the Rams were to lose, then they would flip and they would have logically a much easier scenario because they avoid the Vikings or the Lions with the best record. So they, have something to play for there. The Buccaneers are not resting anybody because they just need to make the playoffs, right? That's the difference between the Rams and them in this scenario. So we'll see how that lines up. And then lastly, the 6 and 7 seeds that I have on here, it's going to be either the Packers or the Commanders, but based on how they do, will determine that, right? All the Commanders have to do, because they're the 6th seed right now with the same record as the Packers, 11-5 for both of them, because the Commanders are the 6th seed right now, all they have to do is win, and they would stay at that spot, regardless of anything else that happens. But if they lose, they would also need Green Bay to lose for them to stay at number 6. But if the Commanders somehow lose to the Cowboys again, and the Packers beat the Chicago Bears, then they would flip, and the Packers would be the number 6 team, and the Commanders would drop to number 7. But based on my predictions, I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Commanders are just going to win, and with that in mind, to end the shows this week, this is what I think the playoffs are going to look like, in my opinion. I think the final predictions are going to look something like this. We got, over here in the AFC, like we talked about, the Ravens are going to win. No way the Browns win again and sweep them. There's just no way that happens. So the Ravens are going to win the North, and they're going to be the number 3 seed. The Texans, like we talked about, are already locked in. I have the Steelers beating the Bengals. I think the Steelers get their act together at home and gain some sort of momentum going into the playoffs. I have them winning and staying as the number 5 seed. And then that would mean that the Chargers, win or lose, they're going to be the number 6 team. And I have the Broncos beating the Chiefs to earn that last spot in the playoffs. I think, like I mentioned before, they deserve it the most out of all those teams. And, the Chiefs are not playing with anybody. Not any of their starters, I should say. So I think this is their opportunity. I think would be too harsh for them to kind of miss out now, right, and kind of crumble. So I'm going to go with the Broncos, meaning that the Broncos will play the Bills the first round, the Chargers will rematch against the Ravens, and the Steelers will play the Texans in the wild card round. And then on the other side of things, like I predicted, I have the Minnesota Vikings beating the Lions, meaning that the Vikings are 1 and the Lions go all the way to 5. The Eagles are already locked into number 2. I should have had this switched because I changed my prediction. So based on what you see here, I actually have the Buccaneers as the number 3, Bucs actually at number 3, and the Rams at number 4. I have the Bucs beating the Panthers, or excuse me, the Saints, and the Rams losing to the Seahawks. So those two are just going to flip. I already mentioned the Lions. I have the Commanders beating the Cowboys this time around, and the Packers, they're going to beat the Bears, but it doesn't matter. They're just going to stay at number 7 because the Commanders are going to win that game. So that means that we're going to have a rematch of the Eagles and Packers. We're going to have the Buccaneers playing the Washington Commanders in a very interesting game. And we're going to have the Rams playing against the Detroit Lions in a rematch of Week 1, Sunday Night Football, I believe, as well. Those are my predictions for how the playoffs will settle after Sunday night. We'll come back on Monday to discuss how accurate I was on Monday's show. But with that being said, that is everything for today's show and for the week. Thank you guys for joining me on the Chip Shot Football Podcast. And please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. That's where you can find more content around the show, more coverage of the NFL, more breaking news, discussions, predictions, previews, everything that you'd want covered around the NFL with me, Manny Mardiege, as your host. Enjoy the games this upcoming weekend. It all starts tomorrow and it ends on Sunday Night Football. I'll see you guys back here on Monday to discuss the fallout of the entire 2024-2025 NFL regular season.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that